And the big story at this hour, Prime Minister Theresa May has suffered a humiliating defeat as a Brexit deal was overwhelmingly rejected by the British Parliament. The UK's House of Commons voted 432 versus 202 against the divorce deal, with less than 2 months to go for the March 29th, which is the date set for Britain to withdraw from the EU. The UK is now in the deepest political crisis in half a century. The country now has to figure out how or even whether it should exit the European Union that it has been a part of since 1973. Now, May's crushing loss marks the collapse of a 2-year strategy of trying to forge an amicable divorce by trying to stay as close to the EU as possible after Brexit.
The House has spoken and the government will listen. It is clear that the House does not support this deal, but tonight's vote tells us nothing about what it does support. Nothing about how or even if it intends to honour the decision the British people took in a referendum Parliament decided to hold. And people, particularly EU citizens who've made their home here, and UK citizens living in the EU, deserve clarity on these questions as soon as possible.
In fact, it is the worst parliamentary defeat for a sitting government in 95 years. Unable to secure her EU withdrawal deal, Theresa May will now try to secure her position as Britain's Prime Minister. Her government faces a confidence vote in 24 hours. The no-confidence motion will be debated throughout the day, and the voting will take place at 7 in the evening, local time Wednesday.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The results of tonight's vote is the greatest defeat for a government since the 1920s in this House. This is a catastrophic defeat for this government. After 2 years of failed negotiations, the House of Commons has delivered its verdict on her Brexit deal, and that verdict is absolutely decisive.
Moving ahead, May's choices are limited due to the fact that her Conservative Party does not have a majority in Parliament. Possible scenarios for the UK include an attempted but probably doomed renegotiation with the EU by May. Now, other options include extending the Article 50 process. The no-confidence motion might trigger a general election. And if Theresa May loses the vote, it might result in the collapse of the Conservative government and may bring in a new Prime Minister as well. The Remain protesters are also demanding a second EU referendum. And we go over to our correspondent Mandy Clark in London for more on this historic defeat that May has suffered. Mandy, what does the rejection of May's Brexit deal really mean for the UK right now?
Well, simply put, it means her deal is dead and she's going to have to go back to Brussels and try and thrash out a plan B. The biggest issue seems to be that Irish backstop. Now, the EU tried to give a bit more clarification on how it would be used, but it simply wasn't good enough for the majority of MPs and they voted it down. So she will be likely heading to Europe fairly soon to see if another option is on the table. But in all likelihood, this is going to plunge the country into more uncertainty because the way forward isn't really clear.
Right, Mandy. Also, how massive is this defeat for Theresa May and how difficult is the road ahead for her right now?
Well, it was massive. It was the biggest defeat in Parliament in modern times since 1924. Now, the big issue for everyone seems to be that backstop. For Brexiteers, they saw it as a way that the EU could tie Britain indefinitely to their rules. That's unacceptable to them. They voted down the deal. The DUP, that's that Northern Irish party that's helping prop up the government, they hated this deal because of the backstop. More because it could lead to a two-tier system where Northern Ireland would be under different rules than the rest of the UK. And for Labour, they hated the deal. They wanted more workers' rights and they wanted to remain in the customs union. Now, the leader of the Labour Party, Jeremy Corbyn, right after the vote, took the opportunity to table a no-confidence motion. Now, in all likelihood, the government's going to win it because that's the one thing that reunites the Conservative Party, and also the DUP said they too will support the government.
Right, Mandy. Now, the next big date is March 29th, which means just 10 weeks to go until the UK is scheduled to leave the bloc. Now, what impact would a disorderly exit have on British economy?
The disorderly exit, the so-called no-deal scenario, will damage Britain's economy in the short term, definitely. Possibly in the long term, possibly indefinitely. The biggest problem to the no-deal scenario is really the lack of planning for it. There has been talk about stockpiling food, of stockpiling essential medicines, and also beefing up border security, but really very little has gone in the way to prepare for that. So yes, the EU economy will of course suffer a no-deal scenario, but really it's Britain who will suffer the worst part of that lack of planning and economically as well.
Right. When it comes to the UK, the citizens, some of them said they want to make sure and stay in the European Union, and some want to leave the European Union. So as of now, how are the British citizens reacting to this big story?
Well, oddly, it has united the majority of the public, for Remainers and Brexiteers, but for very different reasons. For Remainers, they see this as opening the possibility of a second referendum, which they believe that they would win and Britain would vote to remain, or it could lead to a no Brexit scenario altogether. So for them, they see this as a victory, but so do the Brexiteers. The Brexiteers had the same issue as those Brexit MPs who felt the deal really tied them into the EU. They felt this was a vote for them, ensuring that they wouldn't get stuck into those EU rules. And also Brexiteers don't really seem to fear that no-deal scenario. So for both sides have taken it as a win. Really, only time will tell.
That was Wion's Mandy Clark getting us the latest from the UK.